Vamos então seguir para uma outra apresentação, como eu vos disse, a doutora Christinne Tacon, que infelizmente não se pôde deslocar a Portugal, mas preparou um vídeo de apresentação e de exposição que durará cerca de 10 minutos, em que analisar o seu ponto de vista. A doutora Christinne Tacon tem experiência como consultora no setor agrícola, no Reino Unido, e, portanto, faz parte de uma série de grupos de reflexão sobre práticas restritivas no setor agrícola no Reino Unido. Vamos então ver a apresentação, que durará cerca de 10 minutos.
Hello, I'm Christinne Tacon and I'm the Groceries Code Adjudicator, and I've recently acquired my legal powers here in the UK. I'm very sorry I'm not able to be with you, but I have only just started in this new job and I've got quite a lot to do. The history behind the Groceries Code in the UK is that there were two Competition Commission inquiries into whether there was excessive risk being passed down the supply chain. As a result of the second one in 2008, there was a grocery supply code of practice introduced by the Office of Fair Trading, and that had a code of practice but also required all of the retailers to have code compliance officers and to have agreements with all of their direct suppliers. I should make it clear that the groceries code of practice is only between the direct suppliers and the retailers. It does not go the whole way down the supply chain. This became law in February 2010 and applied to the 10 retailers in the UK whose grocery turnover was greater than £1 billion. There was then a lot of pressure from within the direct supply industry and the farming community to say that they needed to have somebody that would police the code, and therefore a new piece of legislation was introduced with all party support, and that became law on June the 25th of this year. But as it was going through Parliament, I was appointed, so I was in a designate position for 6 months beforehand. My background is starting off in engineering, but then I was in marketing, in fast-moving consumer goods for the likes of Fonterra, with butter, cheese and cream in the UK, and with Mars Confectionery. But my last executive job was 11 years running the Cooperative Group's farming business, which was the largest farming business in the UK. We grew lots of cereal crops, but we grew a lot of fruit and vegetables, many of which we packed ourselves before selling on to retailers. And in my 11 years there, we did actually end up supplying all of the retailers. So I was pretty much aware of the practices that were going on up and down the supply chain. The way that the job is in the UK is that I can only adjudicate the code. I have no other legal powers beyond what was written in that code by the Office of Fair Trading. But I do have two ways of working, one of which is that I can arbitrate, so that if a supplier has an issue, they have to take it to their code compliance officer, and if it can't be resolved within 21 days, they can bring it to me and I can arbitrate. Clearly, in those circumstances, the two parties are known to each other. However, most of the issues in the UK are about people being frightened of complaining, frightened that they will actually lose their business, which of course is everything. So most of my powers, or the core part of the powers that people were very interested in me getting, was on my investigative powers. And that's where I can launch a proper investigation, which is all legally supported, so I'll be able to demand information, demand access to emails, where I can investigate if there have been any breaches of the code. The sort of things that are covered in the code is, firstly, I must make it clear, is nothing to do with price. It's all to do with abuses of an agreement, or what people might be required to do once they've had the original negotiation. So it might be that at a later stage people are being asked for lump sum payments to keep the business, or a contribution towards a massive promotional campaign that wasn't agreed at the outset. The code also covers saying that suppliers should have rights of redress for forecasting errors, that they can't be asked to predominantly fund promotions, but they also can't be required to use a packaging supplier or a haulage supplier where the retailer themselves is then getting a kickback from it. So it's the investigations that I would do would be where there is a clear breach of some element of the code. And when I do an investigation, everybody has the right to remain anonymous. If I find a breach of the code, I've got three ways of working. One of which is that I can issue recommendations of how things need to be done differently in future. And I think when you're talking about things like predominantly funding promotions or forecasting errors, which are completely different if it was rice as opposed to a fresh product like strawberries, that I can do recommendations. I can ask them to require them to do name and shame, which is like taking out major adverts in newspapers to saying we've done this wrong. But the third area, which was pushed for very, very hard, was the ability to fine. What I've got to do next, now I've started the role, is issue guidance on particularly how I will start an investigation, how I will decide whether it's been, what the penalty should be, but also what the maximum level of fine would be that I would issue. At the moment, I'm considering that I will actually be asking for a fine which is a percentage of turnover. It needs to be something that is highly punitive and where there was an outright breach of the code.
How do you perceive the role and what do you bring to it?
Well, firstly, I don't really want to set about the role in having investigations. I'm worried about being taken to judicial review and to full appeal. And I also know that both sides of the chain are quite adept at hiding what's ever been done in the books. I might find it very difficult to get the evidence. So my strategy is to work with the code compliance officers. All of the retailers have to have them. I've met most of them, and they're mostly based in legal or in audit. And their duty is to ensure that their business doesn't break the law. And after all, the Grocery Supply Code of Practice in the UK is law. So my strategy is to work with them, to talk to them about the sorts of things that I'm hearing, and maybe in some cases to clarify an interpretation of the code, to see whether we both can agree that this is a potential breach. But I also am trying to work as close as I can with direct suppliers so that they will trust me and tell me what's going on. And I'm saying to people, if you tell me something's going wrong, I will not act on your issue with that particular retailer. But you might just be the 10th person that's told me this is happening, in which case I can then maybe take it up with the code compliance officer, or if I've actually spoken to them about it before and they've had the chance to put it right, I might just go straight into saying, right, I'm going to launch an investigation now. So I think what I bring to it is a pragmatic approach. I desperately want us to have a more efficient supply chain in the UK. I've been there in the middle of it. I've been frustrated by some of the inefficiencies. And I see this as an opportunity to make that more efficient and try to work in the first case by saying, none of us want to go down this route of investigations. Let's try and do it. But I have to have that threat of being able to investigate and to fine to make myself, so that I can actually work.
What are your objectives and priorities?
I think my priority is to build trust with direct suppliers so that they will talk to me. Because if I don't find out what's going on and if I don't have enough information to be able to build up patterns, then I won't be able to give the information to code compliance officers and know what my office needs to do. In terms of my objective, I think my objective is to build a more efficient supply chain.
How are you going to gain the trust of suppliers to get them to come forwards?
That's a really good question. I think that I generally have got a reasonable level of trust within the farming community because I'm well known to them. I am deliberately going out to conferences and spreading my message as wide as I can within the UK at the moment to explain to people what my powers are and what I can do. I think that I need to stress the anonymity and the fact that I will be looking for a pool of evidence rather than any one side. I'm also finding that some of the best ways of building trust is maybe to talk to a group of 20 to 30 people, maybe over dinner, and it's the next day when I start to get the phone calls and the business cards and people saying, I would actually quite like to talk to you about something. So I'm starting to build up a picture.
How are you going to gain the trust of supermarkets to get them to follow not just the letter of your adjudications, but also the spirit?
I think my starting point is that none of the retailers want to break the law, and none of them want me to find that they've been breaking the law. So I see the code compliance officers as more of my allies, and making sure that they have got the power within their businesses to investigate, and for people in the businesses to know that they have to respond to them.
Which areas of the GSCOP do you think will give rise to the most complaints or be the most hotly contested?
Well, I've already started to ask people, what are your top 3 things that you want me to look for? And one of them at the moment is about, there's a code requirement that they're paid on time. And what's happening is that many, many people are being paid, but with a significant number of deductions, some of which can come from completely left field for a promotion that was 3 years ago or a sampling campaign for 5 years previously that are being deducted. And then when the supplier is challenging it, are finding that there's an empty hole, that there's nobody there to take it up with and nobody to talk to them. In which case, I believe that that is a way of not paying people on time. So that is one of the areas where I will be talking to the code compliance officers to say, do you agree with me that this is a way that people aren't being paid on time, and that we need to have a proper process so that when they've got concerns, that they know who to go to, and that they will get a reply within a fixed period of time.
How might you use the sanctions at your disposal?
Well, if I've actually got to the point of launching an investigation, it will be because I am investigating a retailer over something that I've already warned them about. So by the time I then get towards the sanctions, the recommendations might just be where something needs to be clarified. Naming and shaming is really, every retailer protects their reputation their reputation is extremely important to them. But the fines I would intend to use where there's been an outright repeat of something that I've already said, this is going on, you need to stop, and then maybe a few months later I hear it again, and that's where I will intend to use it. So the fines will be to make absolutely sure that no business will ever profit from doing it, and it will be punitive.
If you consider the code of practice needs improving, what can and will you do to achieve this?
Well, that's a very good question, because our retailers are very clever, and if they find a way around the code, they might bring in a new practice, and that is totally within my powers to recommend to the Office of Fair Trading that the code needs to be amended, and then it will become within it. But really, I'm talking about working within the spirit of the code, where we're not passing excessive risk down the supply chain.
Muito bem. Isto conclui a apresentação que estava prevista da doutora Christinne Tacon. Com isto conseguimos cumprir o calendário e o horário que estava previsto para esta parte inicial da manhã. Segue-se um coffee break que estará à disposição lá fora, de cerca de 15 minutos, e vamos reiniciar às 11h30. Queria apenas terminar a agradecer novamente àqueles que nos acompanharam nesta parte inicial, em particular Mrs. Anne Reckens, e dizendo que depois haverá uma sessão de perguntas e respostas ao 12h30, em que também a doutora Anne Reckens estará à disposição. Muito obrigado.